And it all started when invitation from Informs, where we presented. Again, that was a 200 plus audience. That's what I'm just mentioning it. It was very interesting. It was in Florida. Anyway, you know the topic, so I'm going to move to the next one. You must know who is your audience to be an effective presenter. And you want to say some things, and they want to hear something, their interest. That has to have some good overlap. And the more overlap there is, more effective you are. That's called relevance. If there is no relevance or minimum little relevance, you lose them as your audience. You see this guy sleeping off. So in order to know who is your audience, they are C-suite people. And I have also presented this to entrepreneurs, and I've worked with them and analysts. So two things you need to figure out very quickly when you're designing your presentation. What is their goal in coming to your presentation? And who they are in terms of their knowledge and context. You have to understand that first about them, even before even you promise to present. That means you design your presentation based on those two key things in your mind. Then comes, what is your goal? Well, as an analyst or as a consultant, your goal is to inform them, not to educate them in a model or mathematics. That is not the goal. You want to inform them on some subject that is relevant to their need of the company. And other thing that you need to get done by the end of the presentation is you have to persuade them to act on your recommendation. It might go all the way 100%, it might not, but that is what is your goals are. So let's dig into a little more, who is C-suite audience? And I heard a lot of stories. Some people say, oh, they don't understand, they're too busy. Yes, but that is what your audience is. First of all, the people that I've worked with, C-suite people, middle-level managers, they're actually very intelligent, unlike what we like to believe sometimes. And they are also most likely well-educated. They may not be math champion or analytics degrees. They might have, I met someone, a CEO, that was a history buff, and he had a master's in a top school in history. Very sharp, but he's a history major. And they also have very broad view of the company, unlike your focused analytic work, solving a problem in OM or logistics. They have a bigger view and a complete view of the company. So they are distracted by those views when they come to your presentation. They do also make big decisions, big money decisions. They're involved in a $10 million deal just next hour after they leave your room. And you're working on a $500,000 project. So they are busy. They should be busy. And they're impatient. I have seen analysts tell me that they hold that as a negative on their CEOs and so forth. No, it is not. They are supposed to be impatient. They don't have time all the time to sit in. So you have to present yourself in that manner. If time allows, I'll tell you a story that I experienced almost 25 years ago, but I'll get to that if time allows. It really happened to me. And so most of the presentations we do are oral. I'll let you have a look at the slide. Your goal should not be that. I hope you're laughing silently. Um, but that's what happens if we don't prepare with our presentation. One thing that I ask all of you to practice, maybe you're already doing it, you really ask yourself, is this really necessary? Whatever you're saying or putting up on the screen, is it really necessary for today's talk? That's the question. You have to do that self-analysis and be really ruthless. to your editing or work on that. I'll give an example. Um, I met Francis Ford Coppola, the director of famous movie Godfather. He came to GSU and I had a meeting with him. He talked about his writing to our students. Yeah, he's a script writer, movie writer, right? But there is something we can learn. I'm going to tell you how he writes, what he told us. He writes in the first thing in the morning. He gets up, gets freshen up, he gets to his office room, he writes. He writes for 2 to 3 hours, not much, and about 7 to 10 pages that day. Then he goes away, do everything else. Don't write again that day. Next morning, he comes, and here's the most important part. He pulls out his 10 pages, he reads it, and he crosses through it. And he said, sometimes out of the 10 pages, I leave only one. That much of ruthlessness on his own work. And that's what exactly you should do, at least try to do, that can I edit this out? And one rule I have created for myself is this. I try to write. Again, nobody's perfect. We're still trying to get to that point. I ask myself, before I put a word on my screen or my presentation or report, is this word cost $1,000? If it is, I'm not going to use it. That means space point of view, communication point of view, you have to be pithy. No extra word in your anything you present. And it is achievable. But we can do, I can be Coppola, but we can do, try to become like that. All right. So we're going to talk today. We have a lot of slides and stuff, but we may not be having time for all that. But we also want to talk about the order of your presentation, which is a very key thing. Order of your presentation can determine how effective your presentation is. And then we'll get into some non-mathematics. That means language of business is the key for a successful communication, especially to the top management and so forth. And I don't think we'll have time for the number 3, but we'll see. Before I move, there's one thing happens in presentation. We get too excited. We own it as our baby because it's our work. And we tend to get defensive. When I was a youngster, like 30 years ago, I used to take every question as a criticism to me. Don't do that. Don't be defensive. Just defend your work. If they have a question, it is for your work because they have already invited you to present and work on your consulting job. So they accept you already as an expert. You don't have to prove that. All you have to do, give them what they want. That means answer to their problem or solutions, whatever you're trying, you are there to do. So and this Arlen Measure, who's my professor, is passed away. He's a PhD from Chicago. That statement has carried me through rest of my life. I still use it, though I have come down big time from my younger PhD graduation days. All right. So here is the ineffective presentation order, meaning this, by the way, you recognize this: introduction, assumptions, analysis, results, recommendation, conclusion. This is how we were taught in the graduate school. And this is what we should be doing if you're presenting to an academic audience, a teaching audience, or research audience. That's how we have been taught to do. And there's nothing wrong in it. But the question is, when you're presenting to a client or management, we recommend you flip that order. After introduction, recommendation straight. That means what you're there for. And if there's no question, you're done. Make sure you try to get done after that step. That means when you do recommendation, they accept it because they know you're an expert, and that's good enough. Results, okay, if they ask some questions, then you show them the relevant results, where you are coming from to make the recommendation. And then if necessary, you can have to show the analysis. Be ready for that, but don't push it on them. Let them guide you after you have given the recommendation. And just, you don't have to say anything. Let them digest it in the room. Sometimes a good presentation is a silent one. You don't have to really speak through all the minutes of your presentation. Very quickly, I should tell you the story here right now. It has happened to me almost 25 years ago. We write this in our book that I was presenting after 1 year of work with this company. Was presenting to a group of executives, 7, 8 of them. The decision maker, the top honcho, was the senior vice president of the marketing of the company. So as after our lunch was over, I was approaching the dais to start speaking and loading my PowerPoint. I was ready to, speak for 50 minutes at least. Suddenly he gets up, somebody comes and says something in his ears. He looks very worried. He gets up, he comes to me and says, can you tell me whatever you're going to present in, I have 3 minutes, my first time in my life. And I was surprised to see how much I could do on the, you know, on the fly. I did tell him in 3 minutes, less than 3 minutes, what I was going to say. And he said, thank you. He turned to the room. He said, I am in. You guys now listen to Dr. Samaddar. And he thanked me, he left. Guess how long that presentation ultimately lasted? Less than 15 minutes. Why? Because the big man has said, I am in. So rest of them, they have been working with for 1 year. They didn't could care less. They are busy. They are going to do something else up there on their roster. So they all agreed and they clapped me and they wrote the check, etc., etc. The point is, you should be able to tell your recommendation, your work in very pithy 3 minute way for a cliche, but that's it. So that's what I also, and we both tell people to do if they can. Language. I'll let you read this and just hear yourself, read it. Why not? Why not? So there has to be difference in language when you present to a business. We know our mathematics, but we don't speak that. We don't play that in our presentation. It is tempting sometimes to stick to that. Anyway, going forward in our presentation today, um, we're going to talk about some common methods that we are all aware of. I'll talk about causal model, results of regression, how we can present it very badly or present it very well. And Satish will talk about clustering. And if time allows, we'll take care of optimization model. We have examples, many illustrations, and we can share the PowerPoint with the audience after this. So causal model. And let's say, just sit back and think about you did a causal model for your client and you're trying to predict sales in thousands of dollars. And three causal variables that you have modeled successfully is ad expense, bonus, sales force, number of people working in sales. Let's take that as an example. By the way, everything that we present in this presentation came from actual business consulting work. We just change the numbers, tell the story differently, but the essence of these are actual. We didn't make these examples up, except camouflaging the data. So anyway, I have seen many people do that. What exactly I did in front of you. They put out all the ANOVA table, the output, and the circle part of it. Oh, here are the coefficients. Your ad expense has so much of an effect on your sales. This is the worst way of presenting the result. So I'll do, I'll show the worst, then I gradually make it better and better and better. So what I leave you with is the best recommendation that we are making you could follow. And improve would be, without doing all that, ANOVA table and etc., just do this, write the equation. A small improvement, but still too mathematical, but it's much more effective to get their attention than the previous chart, which is full of distraction and clutter. But we also don't recommend this one because somebody has to figure out those multiplication of 22.38, etc., etc. Next step, it is further improved, but still takes some bit of confusion, which is the units of the variables. Now, first, look at the table. It doesn't talk about any equation. It is simply saying ad expense and contribution to sales in $1,000, $1,000 ad expense and $1 bonus expense and all that. And there will be 22.40 thousands of sales. But you have to speak it, 22.40 thousand. And they have to interpret that. They have to be able to connect both X variable and Y variable in their mind. Don't let them do that because that's when they'll start losing. How about this? Where you have made the contribution to sales per unit increase of ad expense. Now you're saying, hey, if you increase 1 unit of ad expense, yeah, which is $1,000, you have $22,400 in Y variable. This is still not clean, but this is reasonably better than the previous ones. What about this? Why not we also made these X variables into one unit, $1, or whatever unit that is. And I call this bang for the buck analysis. That is the name I gave when I presented to my client. Now I'm showing per $1 in these, you'll get $22.4 in sales. Very clear. Now, one can ask, again, people like us will ask, well, divisibility of the variable, how continue it is. We can tackle that. First, get this message. Then, if somebody in the audience asks you that, you answer that. But if they don't, you don't. You don't bring it up. I do have one experience, presentation in forms and other places I've done that. We have done that. Some CEOs or some CFOs are very technique savvy. They have an Excel. They open up the Excel laptop and they put in your equations and be ready for that kind of an audience. That goes back to understanding your audience. If your audience is tech savvy, be ready for that and present it to them that way. But knowing your audience and making sure the meaning of what you're saying is very straightforward. Doesn't have to have mathematical calculations involved in thinking. All right. So a lot of managers have asked me after I do that kind of stuff, they say, so how far can we do this? Meaning, what is the limit? They don't use the word limit. They said, how far we can do this? They're asking limit. So you say, well, and by the way, I didn't do it, the numbers here. You can take the confidence interval and don't use the word confidence interval. Simply put this number in dollar terms in worst case and best case. Your lower confidence interval and upper confidence interval. Without using those words, you can put those numbers in and you can say, oh yeah, $1 in net expense will get you so much, worst case, so much in the best case possibility, and on an average, $22.40. Ceteris paribus. But don't use the word ceteris paribus. You have to explain ceteris. Everything remains the same. Things like that. You can make up your own words that you know is very pleasant and acceptable to your audience. Well, you will face this also when you present a very successful model to an audience like that. They might have a variable in their mind, a causal variable that they know work. How come it is not in your model? To give an example, I'm giving here. See, that's we already had Salesforce, ad expense, and bonus in our model. Hand raises up in the room. They said, we know that salesperson salaries work, affect our sales. How come you don't have it in your model? You should be ready for that if you can. And don't talk about, that's because multicollinearity, that's not happening. But you cannot talk about the word multicollinearity. You simply do a Venn diagram and show that the variable that the yellow one here they're talking about is already captured by the other two variables, most of its impact. So you said, no, you're right. That one does work. But in our model, Salesforce and bonus is taking care of that, the effect of that variable. So you're not missing anything in our role. And that's one way I think is a good way of handling it. uh, to agree with their gut feel variable. At the same time, you show that your model is actually superior and more complete. Oh, Satish comes in here.
Hey all. So this is just a different example of analysis, of mathematical analysis and how you can present it in plain language. But before I get into this, I do want to make one comment. We talked about knowing your audience, and Maria let us know that our audience is CPAs. So you might be wondering, well, why are we presenting things that are perhaps not accounting related? And right, I know many of you are analytics professionals, and that was the topic. But I do want to address that neither of us is a CPA, so we cannot tell you specifically about what CPAs should do. Although in our book we got a guest chapter written by a person who is a CPA. So our point is to show you more generally some analytics techniques and how they could be presented. So here's an example of a consulting job that I did for a bank where they had, let's say, 1 million customers. And in order to assess the riskiness of those 1 million customers, one of the first analyses that I did was a cluster analysis where I segmented them, and it turned out the result was that 5 segments emerged as the best answer. And those segments were built on the basis of 7 different attributes that you see on the left side in the first column there. In case some of you are unfamiliar with what those variables mean, let's quickly go through this. So imagine you have 1 million records of customers in a bank, and age is obvious, right? Length of residence is in months. So 9 represents 9 months of residence, of living in the current residence. In the US, at least, it is commonly assumed in the credit industry that living in the same place for a long time means you are less risky as a financial customer because it indicates stability, right? Household income, that's an obvious thing. This is in thousands of dollars. So this is the average income of 48,000. Revolving accounts refers to essentially credit cards, as does the word bank cards. These two are essentially synonymous. So this number here simply says how many different cards did that person have over a lifetime, perhaps. How many of those bank cards have a current balance greater than zero? What is the percentage utilization? And remember, the higher the utilization, the more risky a person is because they are maxed out on their credit cards, etc. And the months since the newest bank card was opened, essentially a way of thinking of about this is how mm, how far ago or how long ago in the recent past did you get your most recent credit card or loan? The smaller that time interval, that means the more you have been fishing for credit in recent times. So if I'm a bank and I'm trying to make you an offer of credit, I want to know when was the last time you got some other credit card, because if you have had too many other credit cards recently, it makes you a more risky person. So this is the time lag between when you got your last credit card and now. So looking at these 7 variables, we looked at a few million records and broke them down into 5 clusters. So the values you see here represent the average values of for each variable within that cluster. That means all the people out of the million, let's say 100,000, belong to cluster A. For those 100,000 people, the average age was 38, the average length of residence 9, and so forth. And similarly, each other cluster was different in some way. So this is the kind of result that pops out of a software package, right? When you do cluster analysis, this has just been put into a table a little bit more neatly, but essentially this is the output. And there's nothing wrong with showing this to the client because those details help discuss it. But before you get to this detail even, it might help as an analyst to ask yourself, what does this mean to the client? So let me pause and ask you here for a second. Just look at the column A. Look at the customers in column A, and you can use the last column, which is an average of everybody in the sample, as a sort of baseline. How would you describe the people in cluster A if you had to come up with a phrase or a sentence to describe them? Anybody in the chat can put that in, and maybe Maria, if you would be so kind, just read 1 or 2 responses.
We have higher risk, and somebody suggested Chris suggested below average.
Yeah,
So
both are,
all
yeah.
place.
Yeah, that makes sense. So as you can see that this is once you pay attention to those numbers, it's fairly clear. Incidentally, this entire data set was age 30 and above, right? So you don't see the super young people in here, 18 to 30, because separate models are built for them. But so among the 30 and above, these are among the youngest in this sample, right? They have among the lowest income and the highest number of credit cards and utilization, which means they make less money, but they use a heck of a lot of credit. That makes them very risky, right? So your immediate assessment that they are a risky group makes perfect sense. Similarly, if you look at the second group, you see they are the oldest among this entire group. They have very little credit. They don't need credit because they're retired, most of them, right? That's just the average age. So you get the point that once you look at clusters, rather than just show the numbers, it helps if you label each cluster. So I gave the clusters some labels. This is further shortened. You can use an entire sentence to describe them if you want. Cluster A is highly risky, credit dependent. Cluster B are retirees. Well, we call them the shuffleboard set. I don't know if Australians play shuffleboard, but retired Americans play this game called shuffleboard. And so that's just a joke there that says they go to Florida or to the beach and play nearby there, play shuffleboard. Clusters C and D are much more prosperous, C, D, and E. So if you look at C and D, you notice their average incomes are the highest. Even E is not bad. It's the third right there. And C and D, they use credit, but D definitely uses a lot more than C does, which means people in cluster D are likely to be more the type of person that wants credit, that likes to use credit. And so if you're a bank, they are probably the best target for you for any marketing of further credit products, right? So if you understand some of those characteristics, you can label them as such. And then you can do further. What I did next was more analysis on those clusters. I built other models, first of all, to look at the proportion of the population that fell into each of those clusters, but then two key variables. One was the probability of response to some marketing campaign. We were able to calculate based on historical behavior that people who were in group A had a very high probability of responding positively to an offer of credit. Why? Because they are hungry for credit, as we saw in the data. Whereas the retirees had a very low probability of responding, right? And the others were somewhere in between. When I looked at the profitability of those customers, the people in group A were actually losing money for the bank because a lot of them would charge a lot to their credit cards and then default on their loans. Default rates were extremely high in segment A. So when you combine all of this information, how would you present it in an even better way than actually just showing these numbers? Again, showing these numbers in a table like this is not a bad thing. This is not too complicated for a business person, especially a manager in a bank. For them, this is very straightforward. But you can make it, if you want to make it more straightforward than this, you can do that. And here's one graphic that illustrates that. So this is something that does not come out of your cluster analysis output from your software. This is something I had to manually do after I kind of analyzed that, where I looked at those two models of response likelihood. Notice cluster A is the most likely to respond and B is the least likely to respond. The green represents the profitability or how attractive they are to us. The red means they're losing money. The size of the circle represents how big a chunk of the population they are, right? And now on the side, I cut it out of the PowerPoint so that it's not cluttered, but you can actually define the A, B, C, D, E, the meanings of those clusters right here on next to the graph. And essentially one chart tells you everything you need to know as an executive. Right. And you can also see, by the way, within the greens, that there is a change in the intensity of the color. So the darker green represents the most beneficial from a marketing standpoint for this bank, right? So if I was trying to attract customers for a new credit product, Group D would be the first target. In fact, we were able to show this bank that they were going to spend about $10 million on an ad campaign not an ad, but a marketing campaign to attract customers. And we were able to convince them to completely ignore groups A and E and perhaps tailor their products separately for groups B, C, and D, and thereby cut their costs by about half. So one or two simple predictive models can save a lot of money in a marketing campaign. And we were able to show that in dollar terms. Now, again, I did not put that in this presentation, but where possible, when presenting to executives, after showing the results like this, you can simply do the math and say, if instead of randomly bombarding your market base with your message, if you can do it by segment appropriately, you're going to save $5 million. There's no better presentation than telling an executive, here's how much money you're going to save because of this model that you can apply, right? So getting to the bottom line is basically the message, as quickly and as cleanly as you can without too much mathematics. So if I were to present this, I would probably start with this chart and then go backwards into the details as needed, right? So this table would probably come towards the middle of my presentation rather than the beginning of it or the end of my presentation. But the beginning of the presentation might simply be an introduction followed by, here's the bottom line. These are the clusters we found. And then there'll be a dollar figure attached to that in terms of recommendations for the marketing campaign. So let me turn it back. Yeah, so after this, there are a couple of other examples, but we are now 35 minutes into the presentation. So let's take a pulse right now. Do you want to stop and ask questions? Maybe we can take a 5-minute question break and then later go into another example if needed. Would that work for all of you?
That's a good idea.
Okay, so we continue.
Take some questions. So you
It seems like the chat is asking for. It seems like the chat is asking for more examples. So maybe we should continue for now.
All right. Let's go. Tell you what. Let's go to the graphicals one, and we'll come back to. Okay. All right. The picture you're looking at is actually presented by an ex-ambassador of US, and I did collect it from him. It is actually the topic of the last chapter of our book. As you can see, that is the title. That's what people do when they don't really prepare about the audience. They're willing to give all the information. There's nothing wrong in this picture. But I said, I cannot see anything. That's the problem with such charts. And of course, his point was, look, this country, the one that is Venezuela or one of them, they had a lot of bumps. And some of them are very horizontal. That's the point he was making. So he could have made that point by splitting the graph, that these countries are going through a lot of changes, and these countries are much more normal, and they stay the same. Now, that said, there's another example. This one happened, a company hired me, and they, if you see in this chart, the loading times at various docks to Miami, that means they have docks at Austin, Columbus, Detroit, blah, 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 at Seattle, and the transportation time from those docks to Miami. And they didn't give me this. They gave me the data, then they told me, create a regression model. We have heard about you, whatever. I didn't do that. I simply plotted the graph and I couldn't see anything. So now let's talk fast forward. I brought this and then I presented this, not this picture. I presented this that is coming up. I was cleaning up the graph myself and I saw there are 4 graphs at the end, which are strikingly different from others. And ultimately, these two from Sacramento and Seattle going to Miami, you see the pattern? On the early part of the year, like February, March, April, May, the time was much less. And during October, November, it's going up. Yeah, starting July, but more was October, November. That's just sticking to me. I'll tell you what happened. But in my audience, there are real senior managers sitting in my audience. They wanted me to solve the problem, and I'm just showing them this picture. So I said, well, look at these two. And then I said, how about these two from your data? The pattern is early part of the year, it is taking a peak, and then it is going down. And you won't believe me, and I kid you not, I said this, and within 10 seconds, there is a lull in the room. Nobody's saying anything for almost 1 minute. I'm standing there. They're ignoring me. Then they broke into a discussion among themselves. And after a few minutes, they realized I'm still standing there. They looked at me, the senior guy, said, we got it. We know what is happening. Should we break for lunch? Look at this. I don't even know what they got it because I don't know what they're seeing in this. I do not know that. Only thing I did, I showed them their data in a graph in a much cleaner way. To now tell you what they told me over lunch, I said, we have break for lunch. You're paying my time. We go to lunch, and they told me, by the way, there were strikes, labor strikes during those months in those docks. That's why it was picking up in 2 docks early of the year and other 2 docks in the later part of the year. So that's it. Then they said, we now know what to do. Thank you. I said, okay, thank you. So the lesson point is, you don't need to do heavy duty model or modeling to find the mystery, to answer the mystery, and it can help the client. That's the only purpose, helping the client. Oh, we can go back. You want to go back to other examples? We have more examples. Okay, 5 more minutes. Go ahead and give that. Okay. Yeah. Satish will
all right, transition to one more. Yeah, we deliberately kept this back and forth simply because we had enough examples, but we didn't want to go too far in time if you had a whole bunch of questions that you would have rather asked. So I apologize for the back and forth, up and down with the PowerPoints, and that's okay. So anyhow, this was another example of a different kind of clutter, but for a specific reason. One of the CEOs of a global company that's based in Atlanta contacted me and said, we have all of these senior managers in finance, and whenever I ask them for a report of their analysis or forecasting or whatever they have done for the last couple of months, every quarter I ask them for a report on the next quarter, and they just send me an Excel file with 20 worksheets that they have been working on, but I can't make head or tail of what they've done, and that's unacceptable. I need them to learn how to give me a concise report. And so he says, I've heard that you guys train people in communicating better. Can you teach them that? So we got a group of these finance professionals to come to Georgia State in one of our classrooms. And we did a 1-day workshop with them on presenting. So I asked them to come with a presentation ready for whatever it is that they think they need to present in the next 15 days to their CEO. One of those persons came with this presentation, and this was the first slide that person put up on screen and said, so as you can see for client number 6, what's happening is that the percentage of discount and something or the other. This was the first statement out of that person's mouth. Again, I stopped them and I said, wait a second. I'm sitting 20 feet away from the screen where you're projecting this. I can't see anything that you're talking about. If you count, there are about 10 or 11 columns and times 20 rows, right? How many? That's at least 200 numbers in this. Between 200 and 250 data points are being projected on a screen, and you're presenting that to whoever and saying, as you can see. So just like on that graph. Point is, there was too much clutter. I said, what is the main message you want to give here? Just say it in a sentence. Don't show me any numbers. Just tell me in a sentence, what are you trying to say? And so the person said, well, what we found was that we give a lot of discounts to our big businesses. And when we increase the percentage of discount, the volume discounts, our per unit profitability is going down significantly. And I want the boss to be aware of it. So I said, oh, so the discount is in the third column from the end, and your profit per unit is the last column. So it's really just those two columns that you want to show, right? So I said, okay, why don't you show that? And notice now, I also got that person to sort the data in descending order of, or ascending order of the profitability, rather, which was the last column, rather than sorting by client name, which made no sense. And then we said, instead of just showing these tables as a number, you really are trying to show that there's a relationship between discount and profit. So why not just draw a scatter plot, right? So this one scatter plot essentially tells you everything that tells the audience everything that you want to say, that as the discount offered, the percentage discount goes up, this is how far the profitability per unit is going down, right? Which may seem like a no-brainer, but there were different pricing schemes for different companies, so it was not a perfect straight line. But this is what they wanted to show, right? So you get the point here that the simplicity of getting straight to the point as opposed to that. So let me now backtrack and just give you one reason why, right? So here's the armchair psychology. Why do people want to show all of this data, right? So what tempts a person to show this table rather than a simple chart? And the answer is they want to impress the boss by showing them how hard they worked and how many calculations they had to do to come up with the answer, right? So that temptation is there in most analysts. Because we do so much math and heavy lifting, we want everyone to see all the heavy lifting that we did, when in fact the audience only wants to see what they want to see, which is, tell me what the point is. And the point is just this, right? So avoid this whole desire or temptation to show everybody how hard you worked, right? Because it's not needed.
All right, so let's go
So we are now.
We're going to wrap this up now. There are more examples, and I think we've gone through this. Sorry about that. Yes. Well, I just put this up. We do that. We love this picture. The Venn diagram tells us nothing, but it is so cute. Don't fall for that trap. Meaning, don't do anything that you think is cute but doesn't have any effect on your communication itself. So always be purpose-driven, pithy, and short rules. You can use dimensions, data, ink, background, all you can. It is not only just a picture and words. You can use the whole real estate of your presentation in multiple different ways. One, what Satish was showing, the intensity of color can be used to make a point in very subtle way and non-crowded way. We recommend books by Edward Tufte. I think some of you already know this. He has good charts on and graphs to make points. And we're going to leave it with questions now. And we're involved in our little company, Absolute Analytics and Management. And those are the three key points we're giving you. We don't read from our screen. You can see it. Now we open the stage for question. Or Felix, could you help us with any question you received?
Absolutely. So I haven't seen any questions in the chat so far, but so if you have any questions, just please post them and I'll try to bring them up. In the meantime, while people maybe try to formulate their own questions, I would like to ask my own.
Sure.
Which is, so your first rule essentially is like you want to start with the recommendation. And in the recommendation, in order to make a recommendation, you mentioned this, you need to make causal inferences based on the data. And I just wanted to, this might be a more abstract point, but I just wanted to know if you've been paying attention to the work of Judea Pearl and his calculus for causality and, his directed graphs. And if you've ever had to use essentially a directed graph in order to explain your recommendation based on a causal logic.
We do know about directed graphs. I think that's a very good way it will be if causality is the one you're making the case on. And that's a very astute point. And yes, we will encourage that. graph method of showing the causality. And
Oh, thank
I
so
I
there's
guess
some other
what that means is that in that instance, the analysis and the recommendation kind of go together in that
Mhm.
chart, right? So you're essentially combining both elements. So rather than the basic idea of starting with the recommendation still applies, except that as you're making the recommendation, the causalities or the analysis about the causality is already being demonstrated as part of it.
yeah, also I'll
Very.
say this, it's also then goes back to knowing your audience.
Mhm.
If you believe audience would love that kind of language, that kind of, causal based, arrow diagrams, graphs, uh, go for it.
So,
So,
yeah, thank you for answering my question. I just want to get to the other questions as well,
Sure.
quickly.
all right.
Sorry to cut you off. First one is yes, the recording will be made available for rewatching. And if that's not enough, I also like to recommend that they did write a book about this topic, so that is available for anybody at any time.
Yeah,
So
that's a
here's
good
an interesting
idea.
question. Here's an interesting question. So how will you change a manager's mind if you want to simplify a presentation and they don't?
Um, my immediate take on that, don't give them that chance first. Don't be rude. You present in a simple way. Now, if you're presenting to only one person, of course, their idiosyncrasies has to be taken care of. You present. But if you're presenting to a group, that's mostly I've done, like, six or four or three. You will see people, most people are busy and they're running for other jobs, other work. So my recommendation would be, you're not changing people's mind. You're just playing with their mind. You give them what they needed, what they hired you for, your recommendation. And then it's like onion peeling layers. If you if they want more layers, give it to them. No problem.
Yeah.
But without losing the other members in the room. And it will happen. Some of them say, you know what, I have seen enough. Okay. I mean, that's how I'm going to
Yeah,
do it.
no,
Mhm.
I just would like to add one thing. In my experience, it has happened to me where I'm presenting to a group of, say, 8 people, and most of them are managers who are happy with the easy, in plain English presentation, but there'll be one statistician in the group who wants to challenge every assumption and the data and wants to see all my charts and graphs and so forth. If that happens, I usually simply say, looks like you are a more technical person. You and I can take this offline and have a separate discussion. If anybody else, if all of you want, then I turn to the others and simply say, if all of you want to hear this, I am happy to delve into the statistics behind what's going on. Let me know how you want to do it.
Is
Uh,
one question?
Another question is, so first of all, I saw a question. Somebody asked whether there are free apps or software available to do analysis and modeling for small companies. And us being our business user group, I of course have to make a recommendation for our studio. It's a wonderful open source software with a really robust package ecosystem. And I mean, that is the main mission of our group, is to make this kind of technology more available. So another interesting question that I saw in the chat, which was like, how would you mentally prepare to present on an industry or a company that you're not familiar with, where you can only look at the data, but you're missing essentially the context value of the data. So how would you approach a problem like that, like you did with the docs?
If I may be so blunt, I won't present that way. I will find out what the context is. And this is the first recommendation of any analytics job. You do need to find the context. Otherwise, you might be the genius in the world, but you'll miss them, their actual goal. You cannot afford to do that. It's okay to ask them before you start your work, can I interview you? Can I sit down with you? Do all that. Push it on them. They make sure they understand that if you understand their need, their context, their purpose is help. Actually, very quickly, not a plug, I also have a CAP. I sit in Informed CAP, Certified Analytics Professional Exam Board, and I set the questions. One group of knowledge is problem framing, and then problem framing, and then analytics framing of that problem. Out of 7 skills of as an analyst or analytics professional, those two are very important. Knowing the context and framing the problem the way it should be framed. And any mismatch is out bound to fall on its face at the end. And you don't want to leave any company that way. But that's my feeling to that question.
I perfectly agree with what Sub said. I would add one more thing, that it's very hard to even be an effective analytics person, to even do your statistical analysis if you don't fully understand the business, because the quirks in the data that you find, if you don't understand the business context, you will not know if the data is clean or not. So if you're analyzing a variable, how do you know if that variable makes sense if you don't know the context from which that variable came and what values are appropriate for it?
There's another interesting question here, which I struggle with personally a lot, which is like, how do you know that you found the best graph for the job? Are there any criterions you use personally to kind of make that final decision?
It is in the eyes of your audience. You cannot have a formula for this. Don't seek for a formula. It comes with experience, and that's a cop-out answer. But it is sometimes even you ask your anybody, colleague, and hey, look at my picture. See, what do you see? Just test them, and that's it. That will help you. That will. By the way, nothing has to be perfect. It has to be better. It has to communicate to your audience. And when your audience eyes light up, you know you have hit them. And it'll happen over time. That's what I'm going to leave it. But if I quickly add the one, it is Satish's one company he worked on, is they about the problem framing. They came with to him saying, "We have a sales problem. Please help us analyze it." After all his work and all that stuff, he found out actually there is a bottleneck in the supply chain that was actually halting their sales. So the problem framing was not sales problem or marketing problem. It was actually supply chain operations management problem. And once it was understood by the company and Satish presented this, they're all for it. They went and fixed. See, once the problem is found, it is not that much to solve it. It is that mystery part. How do you get to the problem? That is where I think the top analysts make their money. That means show them the other way that they didn't think. And if they've thought about it, great, your job is done. And they will still appreciate you and give you the money. Anyway, I'm going to leave it there. Um,
Okay, awesome. I think there's one question about do you work with clients to help explore more context? And I think you kind of responded to that. The question would be, do you ever work with clients to add more context to your grasp before the presentation? And I think you can already address that in the earlier one, is that yes, without context, you cannot even you cannot even get started.
Don't take the job. Don't do it.
Yeah, don't take the job if it will not provide context, because you're flying blind.
Can I, if I may, I'll give you one quick example. One of my friends works as an analytics professional in a pharmaceutical company. And he was showing me some of his data. And we typically think of attributes like I showed you for the bank, attributes like what's your age, what's your income. What do you think the attributes are in a pharmaceutical company when they are developing a new drug? Well, they're doing a predictive model where the dependent variable is the side effects, the degree, the severity of the side effects that are being created by the drug in the drug trials. And so that's the Y, the dependent. And the predictor variables are all the chemical composition parts of the drug, like how many chlorine atoms, how many ionic bonds, how many covalent bonds, how many benzene rings, and so on and so forth, right? If I was the analyst on that job, I would refuse it because I don't understand any of that. So if I found a correlation between a column that said number of hydroxyl ions and the side effect that you're trying to predict, how would I even know whether that data actually was accurate or not, or whether it made any sense or not? Because I don't understand that chemistry. So no matter how much I'm great with artificial neural networks or statistics, that is a problem I am not capable of solving, right? So I would give it to somebody else.
That is a very interesting point, because isn't that what unsupervised neural networks do inherently?
Right.
Yeah, and you give the problem to the unsupervised network, but
Yeah,
you
yeah.
you want to solve the problem as a consultant. If I could add one thing we already said before, remember that one person in the room that is showing a lot of knowledge and halting you during the presentation, most likely that person is trying to show his or her knowledge to the his or her colleagues in the room. Remember that. And never cross that person. Give him the utmost attention, because he can blow up at the end and ruin everything. So always treat him very nicely. Give him everything he wants. And as Satish was saying, take it offline, that kind of stuff. But whatever you do not cross him, because he's on the other side and you have to make sure he plays ball with you. And again, this is a skill set that comes over time, but make sure he's playing ball with you and you kind of talk him into your solution. Give him the ownership of the solution. And he did everything, that kind of stuff, without being, condescending. But that's why the speaking is very important that way. I'm going to stop talking.
I think that was a great point to end it on. And we're at time. So I just want to, Maria, you want to kind of say final
Absolutely.
words?
That was great presentation. Thank you so much, Satish and Saf. And again, I want to mention that there's a fantastic book recently published, which is based on all the experience and examples that were shown. And I will include the link to the book in later in following up email to follow up. And also, I'm doing the recording, and the recording will be available to all of those who sign up, and I will send it as a separate email. I want to really thank Satish and Saf for presenting such great insights. That was a great presentation. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone,
Thank you.
for
Thank you.
listening to us. And any questions, you can always email us. And that's it. And you can have all the contact information.
I hope to see you again at our webinars. You were absolutely fantastic. I saw 120 people at the meetup, and that was like for the whole hour. That was a great presentation, lots of interest, and I hope to be able to invite you in Melbourne and to our
have coffee.
webinars further. Absolutely.
Thank you
Best
so
of the
much
shop of
for
Melbourne.
listening to us and inviting us.